everybody to this webinar, which is called Uncover, which is UN cover, because the idea is understanding youth engagement in United Nations and how these processes work. This conversation was on for a while in terms of having a webinar for South Asians, particularly because when we first as Blue Ribbon got in touch with the UN processes, before we did, we thought of UN processes as being very vague, abstract, out there, and we having no access to them. And when we started them, we were kind of pleasantly surprised that the entire youth constituency, particularly the MGCY, is run in a very, very open and transparent manner, and that we could really access almost everything. I mean, I guess everything. There were sort of almost no secrets around what was being said on behalf of us and how it was being arrived at. Uh, but also what was important for us from the South Asian perspective was that we felt that not enough people from South Asia knew of how to access. I mean, given that we are like a quarter of the world's population, we were definitely not a quarter of the people present on a lot of these forums, and we definitely want that to change. And I think that intent was also from the overall MGCY. And that's what kind of brings us to this seminar, webinar rather, where what we're going to try and do is share ways in which, or share the entire process of how this works, how youth engagement at UN works, and how you can be a part of that. And we have people here who have been at the helm of affairs, I can say, in this. They've been, not only are they responsible for making this work, but I guess also responsible for keeping it transparent, keeping it open, and keeping it very, very inclusive. So we have three friends here. Christopher, I have not yet met, and Sabah and Ashish, who I've had the chance to meet. So I'll just give some short introductions to each of those. So Sabah is an old acquaintance now. I would say it's been a while since I know her, and she's been through a whole range of organizations. Her resume reads everything from a mission in Guyana to being OP for MGCY to working a bit in the UNEP and so on and so forth. But she's been, I know her as best as the operating partner, or the one of the focal points of organizing this effort, helping simplify things for us. That's Sabah. Ashish is a fellow South Asian, and Ashish learned a lot from Ashish on policy and lobbying at Rio Plus 20. And Ashish is a part of the post 2015 task force. The NGCY guy in New York, which means that a lot of times he is a part of several meetings on the ground. And between three of them, over the next half an hour or so, we're requesting them to give us a flavor of, first from Sabah, what happens with the NGCY, why NGCY, what's the idea behind it, how is it broadly structured, after which Ashish would go into the nitty-gritties of how it functions on a day-to-day basis. And then Christopher, finally, we requested to tell us how it all translates into engaging with the actual UN process on the ground. How does everything translate in, and also maybe a motivational spin to participation for all of us, a call for all of us to engage very actively, which will definitely help this. So I'll hand over to Sabah now, and let's take it up from there. Sabah?
Okay, fantastic. Thank you very much, Abhishek. So why get involved with a major group of children and youth, and what is it? So 20 years ago at the Earth Summit, there was which was a big conference of world leaders discussing climate change and the environment and the issues that are impacting everyone in our lives. They decided that civil society, that's us, young people, members of local authorities, business and industry, people who are being directly impacted by the decisions that are made by governments, should also have a voice at the UN negotiations. And therefore they created 9 major groups. And one of the 9 major groups that is the mechanism or the way that young people can get involved is the major group of children and youth. And you're all welcome to be part of that, and hopefully you are all part of that. And it's a way that young people can express ourselves, can contribute content to the discussions and the negotiations at the UN. Now, of course, we have to remember that it is the United Nations, so it will be different governments there, so it's very important people want to have a voice. So what young people do is and also because there's so many young people, as the population has just passed 7 billion and it's growing, and a lot of them live in South Asia, um, it's increasingly important that we work out what the key issues are, because it's true wherever you are in the world you'll have different problems or different things that impact your community or your local area, but there are certain things that impact all young people. For example, like, it doesn't matter whether you live in India or China or the Philippines or Ireland or the US. If you don't have a job, you are being impacted by the economic climate. You're being impacted by the fact that you may not have a decent work, or you may be underemployed. So what the Major Group of Children and Youth tries to do is we try to raise awareness among governments of the issues that are not being addressed, or tackling the emerging problems that we see are going to become a bigger issue if they're not dealt with. And we try and do it in a working together format. So we don't treat member states like they're the enemy. We treat them like we're partners, and that we have something that we need to share with them, and we try and work together to try and find a solution. So we know that we are young and that we have a lot of idealism and passion, and we have a lot of ideas, and we know that sometimes governments may say we don't have the experience to go with that. But what the Major Group of Children and Youth does specifically is try and show that young people are impacted by these issues. We are the generation that is currently impacted, and we're also going to be the generation that's going to be inheriting the problems. So it's very important that we're part of the solutions from now, because in the future it'll be too late. We need to start working together, and we need to think of it in a holistic way, because we may not have created all of the problem, but we have to be part of the solution if there is going to be change. So it's something that a lot of young people get involved with. You can be involved to whatever extent that you want, and there is a few different ways to make things happen a little bit easier, because of the fact that young people don't have very much money. We try and do as much as possible online, so we have meetings every few weeks, sometimes every week, to discuss different topics or different themes that are very important that are being discussed at the UN. So we'll have different teams, and they will be, so we'll have focal points for each of those themes. And the job of a focal point is not to lead. We're very consensus driven. We're a constituency, we're not an organization. So we are an umbrella under which youth networks, youth organizations, clubs, individuals can participate in the UN and have their voice heard. So what we do is we work with any young person under the age of 30 is welcome to be a very active member. If you're over 30, you can be an observer, but you don't have the same voting ability. And what we do is we work with young people from around the world. We try and build capacity, and we try and help them work together to come up with the key issues that are impacting us and the key things that we'd like governments to do about it. And then we go to the governments and we try and lobby them. So in order to make it easier, to give it a little bit of structure, we have thematic focal points who are online, and they are also offline, and they try and get more people involved. They try and make sure everyone has their voice heard. They facilitate the discussions. We don't have leaders as such, but we have processes in order to make things happen and get things going forward. So everyone is welcome as a team member. If you want to volunteer more, and if you're interested in a particular topic, you can become a thematic focal point. Then we have a task force. A task force, we basically have working groups, and we have which are the day-to-day stuff, like communications has a working group, capacity building has a working group. Then we have the different task forces, which are the different topics. So if we're lobbying for water issues, we have a water task force. And then we also have organizing partners. Organizing partners, or OPs, we act as the we work as liaisons between the United Nations Secretariat and the Children and Youth Major Group. So our job is to, because the UN will have information that they want all of the children and youth to know. And so they'll say, for example, that there's a meeting and you can make a statement or you can read a speech. So the organizing partners have to go to these calls, they talk to the UN, they say, okay, we'll have a 3-minute speech. They'll then tell the youth, okay, we have 3 minutes. So to make it easier for the UN, if there's a problem, for example, if they are concerned about the youth want to do a protest, the UN, they have governments to deal with. They can't just have a protest in the middle of the session. They need to know about it so security are not threatened, because you don't want to cause an international incident. They have to warn security that the youth will be doing a protest. So the organizing partners will register in advance, they'll get permission from security, and they'll do that. So it can be quite interesting. I know that during Rio Plus 20, for example, we had a lot of young people from Asia. They wanted to do a very peaceful protest. They wanted to just have they wanted to sit in a circle and just have a day of silence where they were just protesting the fact that there was yes, they were going to sit in silence, and they wanted to just sit in silence in the middle of the courtyard of the UN for like a whole day to just protest the way things are going and to say that we can't handle this anymore. We're just, we're going to just sit here and be very polite. And actually happened, and I think it was actually your organization, Abhishek is telling me, what happened was security did not approve it. Security kept not approving it. They approved everything else. They approved youth tearing up the statement. They approved youth wearing red clothes and standing around the thing. And what they were doing was say YC. They were basically, I think Abhishek can even jump in here to give a little bit more information, but they were going peace within, peace with others, and peace within environment. They were trying to do this silent protest, but security was not approving it. They didn't understand why a large group of people would like to sit in the middle of the grass in the sunshine in silence. So they thought it was a security threat.
What was good was that we kind of persisted with the demand. I guess Sabah, you must have, because finally we did get that approved, and then for the 2 out of the 3 days of the main conference, we had an area marked out where we just sat in silence for about 20 minutes before the day's events would start, because that was the whole sort of theme, peace within, before you try to create peace in the world.
Exactly, and we kept trying to push it with security. We're saying, what's the problem with having people sit in silence? They're not like disturbing anything. They're not in the middle of the negotiations. They're outside. They're sitting there in silence. They're doing it for peace. And but it was very hard for them to just approve it. So it's not all easy. Sometimes it can be very complex. Sometimes the youth themselves will have very different opinions. So, for example, at Rio Plus 20, at the end, there were some youth who wanted us to all march out of the UN and say this was a big failure, let's just forget about it, the UN is useless, there's nothing that can be done. And there were other youth who were like, no, we've had some successes, let's all, we can't just do that, we'll undermine all the progress we've made. And it was a lot of debate because in the major group of children and youth, every voice is equal. So everyone has the same right to express their opinion, and we have to work together to reach consensus. So if somebody has an opinion that differs, we'll sit there and we'll discuss it and we'll talk about it and we'll try and reach a compromise. But it was very hard because it was very hard because nobody wanted to reach a compromise on that issue. Everyone was like, no, this is very strong, this is what I really want to do. And in the end, half the group walked out, the other half group stayed. And some of the group went to talk to the press, some of the group went to the beach. They're like, no, we can't handle this anymore. And it was very sad because the major group Children Youth always tries to work as a united group. Even though we disagree on the smaller issues, we try and work and get the bigger issues together. But at the same time, we've done a lot. So I know that I forgot to introduce what Rio Plus 20 was. It was the conference 20 years after the Earth Summit, and it's very important if you want to get engaged with the UN that you try and do it through a major group because it's an existing mechanism. You have the opportunity to play an active role. It's run by volunteers. There are no paid staff in the major group of children and youth. It's all young people. And it's up to us to do what we want with it. So there's a lot of great opportunities, and there's a lot of young people from all over the world who are very passionate about these issues and want to work with other young people who are also interested. So you have a great opportunity, and especially as you are from South Asia, it's very important that your voices are heard at the UN level, especially if you want to have change. So I think that it's very great that you're having this call today, and thank you all for being here, and congratulations for taking the first step towards making positive change in the world.
Thanks, Sabah. We remember those days in the Rio Plus 20 quite fondly. And I think one of the things that the organizing partners, like people like Sabah, managed to do is to try and build consensus as much as possible, which is very, very difficult with the youth. I would say it was, in fact, quite challenging. Everybody had their own take and their own opinion, but we have interesting ways of trying to come to consensus. And I think Ashish can now step into how do we make this whole diverse constituency work together? What are the mechanisms, structure, and so on? So Ashish, if you want to take over.
Sure, sure. So, as Sabah said, the major group of children and youth is one of the civil society groupings within the CSD process. That's the United Nations Commission on Sustainable Development, which is now over and will be replaced by the High Level Political Forum. So, that's basically the body in the UN which talks about sustainable development and policies related to sustainable development. So, all the member states have a seat, and civil society has 9 groups, and youth is one of them. So how we've set up the major group of children and youth is, I mean, of course, we have the operating part. I mean, uh, can you all see the slide on the screen?
The organizing partners.
Yeah, but I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, okay. So you have the organizing
Ashish,
part.
if you have video, you may want to turn it on as well.
Oh, I think I, I, I thought my video was on.
Now you've turned it on.
Oh, okay.
No, it wasn't. It was just me.
Oh, okay, never mind. Sorry. Yeah. So yes, that's how the major group is structured. And in terms of how we run our processes, we have what we call a facilitation call every month, where we talk about upcoming opportunities at the UN and how they want us to be engaged and what our content will be on the basis of that engagement and how we will go about developing that content. And some of it is direct meetings at the UN. Like right now, the open working group is taking place. The open working group is the ad hoc group which meets to talk about the thematic areas of what will be included in the sustainable development goals, which will be replaced by the millennium development goals. So how typically it is set up is based on whatever the issue that requires input or requires youth perspective. We have a task force coordinator for that. So like as Sabah said, there'll be someone for water, there'll be someone for agriculture and all those kinds of things. And there are, so some are thematic focal points, some are task force coordinators based on how big the issue is. They come up with drafts and what our position is, and this is all done on open source software which is available to anyone, and anyone can add to it or raise concerns if they see something that they don't like. So basically, yes, the coordinators start the process, everyone helps them with it, and when it is finalized, they may have some meetings before finalizing it. When it is finalized, it is put out for 24 hours for red flags, because we work on a consensus basis. So it is emailed out to the listserv. Anyone who has any problem can bring it up, and they talk about what their problem is, and they're contacted by one of the OPs to discuss that problem. And if a consensus can be reached, then we carry forward with it. If it can't, then there's a mechanism to deal with that. So that's the
Just to
general.
explain,
Sorry.
a red flag, just to explain, the red flag is if you cannot live with it. It's not that you don't agree with it.
Yeah.
It's like if the major group of children and youth include this topic, I can't live with it.
Yeah. Yeah.
Then you can red flag it. We don't red flag small things like I don't like that sentence.
Of course. Yeah. Yeah. And we have had red flags in the past for some contentious issues. It's always, it's always difficult, but that's part of the process to make it as inclusive as possible. So yes, that's how we work. And I guess you guys may have more specific questions in terms of the process, which we'll get to in a short while. But in terms of the specific steps, I think that's how it's done. Abhishek?
Great, Ashish. Yeah, I think Ashish, that helped for sure. I was saying in terms of specific mechanisms that we use, like meeting words and Pirate Pad and our Skype calls, and so if you can also say how it actually happens on the ground, what are ways in which ultimately it translates into?
Sure. So, because a lot of people are in different countries and everyone is not in New York, our monthly meetings are online. It's on Skype. A lot of our focal points and a lot of our task force coordinators do not live specifically in New York, so a lot of the work is done remotely online. Through our different Google groups. And when any drafting is taking place, it is done on softwares like Meeting Words or Pirate Pads, which is basically available, which is an open source thing. So everyone can see what is being written and everyone can add to it and ask questions on the side. There's a chatting mechanism as well. And if there's a specific meeting taking place in New York, whoever can make it to New York, of course, makes it. And if people are associated with the credited organizations, they have badges. Otherwise, we get UNDESA to credit them and they participate in the meetings. Now, what participation looks like depends on the format of the meeting. The most recent example is the open working group meetings, where we had a civil society hour talking with the co-chairs in the UN Secretariat, where major groups are given speaking slots in addition to presentation spots. So how the MGCY went about that was because we had to share it with all the other groups. For each day, for each theme, we chose one speaker who read out the statement. And I mean, by reading out, I don't mean they simply just read it. Like they worked with the people on the task forces who prepared the content and everything. Then they learned the statement and they learned how to say it in the most effective manner. And whenever we had interventions, mostly it went to people who knew about that thematic area. That's how it's normally done. But anyone and everyone is welcome to propose their name to be able to want to speak. And also, speaking officially in the forum, in the room, is a very small aspect of the entire lobbying work. A lot of uh, getting our voices heard happens when we set up meetings with other member states. We set up bilateral meetings and we speak to them and we say, these are the documents we prepared, these are our lobby points, this is what the children and youth major group, which has universal constituency and members from all countries, uh, really value, these are their priority areas. So that's one way we do it. Then we also have side events. Side events are like breakout events, uh, when the main plenary and the meeting is not taking place. And we had a side event with the Commonwealth. We had a side event with the permanent mission of Mexico, with the permanent mission of the United Kingdom. So that's typically how these things are structured. We also had something called a member state briefing with UNICEF and other agencies, where we specifically had an event and invited member states and other actors to brief them and talk to them about the place of children in the post 2015 agenda and the SDGs. So some of the mechanisms are specific processes. Some of them are done on ad hoc basis, and sometimes meetings come up where we are supposed to have a quick response. So we mobilize online, and if someone is in New York and able and willing to be there, then they do so. So does that make it better, Abhishek? Like, is that more?
Yeah, thanks, Ashish. Yeah, I think one thing I want to two things that stand out. One is I think some of it may sound highly technical to someone who's starting out, but there's a very steep learning curve, which means if you sort of splash in the waters for just about a month through active engagement, you will figure a lot of this language out. Red flags and interventions and side meetings and intersessionals and open working groups. So I think that is one. The other thing important that I want to share is that everything is out there and everything is transparent and everything is open to intervention within time limits. So if you are able to intervene within the time, everything it's completely open for you. So irrespective of which country, what organization, anybody can intervene. And I think that's very important because it's representing youth from around the world. Uh, so yeah, those two sort of aspects. Yeah, Ashish, I was just going to come on this. In fact, this question, saying what is happening now. So what are the areas? What are the thematic conversations and stuff? If you can just share.
Sure. So what's taking place
Hello.
specifically right now? Sorry, was someone saying something? No. Okay. So the phase
Hello.
we are in at the UN right now can be defined, like there are three parallel processes kind of thing. One is the post 2015 development
Hello.
agenda, which the UN is mobilizing different committees and they're following.
Hello.
Who is saying hello?
Yeah, Ashish, you'll have to mute Nehul. Nehul is
Hello.
talking. Nehul, welcome. But we'll just mute you. Uh, And
Okay,
yeah,
I muted him. Yeah.
Ashish, you can continue.
Yeah. So
Yeah.
the post 2015 development agenda is the process that the UN is working on to create what they call the post 2015 development agenda, because the development agenda for the UN till 2015 is informed by the Millennium Development Goals. So what is considered important, what priorities are given to, what resources are allocated to, is determined within that framework. So what is going to happen when the mil- the time frame of the Millennium Development Goals expires? It will be replaced by the post 2015 development agenda. And as you can see in this graphic, like these are the four different official reports that will be fed into the UN Secretary General's report, and which will ultimately uh, also inform sustainable development goals. But I'll get to those details in a minute. So one process is the post 2015 development agenda. The other stream is the post Rio plus 20. So things that were agreed upon in Rio are being implemented and applied. So one of the agreements was to replace the Millennium Development Goals with the Sustainable Development Goals. So that is what we call the SDG process. Now the SDG process, I mean, you just say the SDG process, but you have to talk about what the themes in the SDGs will be and how those themes will be prioritized. So those things are discussed in what is called the open working group. The open working group is a meeting that convenes every month, but they have a break for the summer right now, and they discuss different themes that will be associated with the sustainable development goals. So they have things like agriculture, water, land degradation, youth, health, population dynamics, poverty, and etc. And the next meeting is going to be in November. So the and then another process that was being followed but is now over is the high level political forum, because in Rio they also decided that the body at the UN, which will talk about sustainable development, will be changed from the CSD, which was the Commission on Sustainable Development, to the high level political forum. So this is a slightly different institution, slightly different setup in terms of how sustainable development and specific policies are talked about. It has greater civil society participation, it has some review mechanisms. So yeah, these are the three processes, and we are involved very heavily in the open working groups. We are also involved in the post 2015 development agenda by contributing to these reports, by having meetings with people who are writing these reports. In the open working group, we take part in the big meetings. We lobby member states on the side. We hold side events. In the high level political forum, we were doing the same thing, but that process is now over. And in fact, the GA just adopted the high level political forum, and next year it will be more full fledged. Did I miss anything, Saba, or is
Where
this?
GA is the General Assembly.
Yeah, sorry guys. Here's an assembly.
No, I think thanks, Ashish. I think that was quite a. I mean, it was quick, but I think it was sort of a sweeping sort of conversation, and I'm sure we have questions around a lot of these. But I was wondering, since we were talking about lobbying and sort of what's happening on the ground, if Chris, you want to step in and also share with us the third part of this conversation before we go into the Q&A, which is around how all of this translates into actual on the ground sort of reading out of statements, and how's life like at how's life like in New York as being a part of MGCY.
Well, if you're interested in knowing how life in New York is, it's dreary and expensive. Um, but I'm a New Yorker, so whatever. Uh, I just want to reiterate the concept of this being very technical and difficult to understand. When I first started doing UN advocacy, it was like a completely new world. I had no idea what was happening. What you study in a book and what you see on the ground are two different things. And you can know the whole thing, the whole entire history, and all the acronyms and jargon of the UN. But once you get there, it's a whole new world. So if any of you are intimidated by anything Ashish or Saba or I will say, please don't feel like it's something that should scare you, because it's just, like was said before, a steep learning curve. In terms of being on the ground in New York, being here is sometimes a complicated issue because you kind of have to keep track of all the partners and the diplomats that you work with and the other NGOs that you work with and UN agencies. And you kind of, in between meetings, as Saba and Ashish were talking about the open working group, a lot of the things that you're doing is just keeping your face present at as many events as possible so people can remember, oh, the major group of children and youth are here. Oh, there's a young person representing the major group or from another NGO. So a lot of the times, in between all these meetings that we're talking about, it's just a matter of showing up to events and being present as much as possible. Am I not loud enough?
Yeah, please talk a little louder.
Hold on, maybe if I Can you hear me? If I speak like this?
Yes.
Yeah.
Is this better?
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So being on the ground here, as Ashish is showing us all with his diagram of how the UN processes work, once you're here, it's kind of just a matter of not necessarily lobbying, but I'm going to repeat what I said before in case no one heard, but a matter of showing up to events and being present. The presence makes a big difference because in between meetings, there isn't much happening in terms of sustainable development or post-2015. When the negotiations are going on at the UN during official events, that's when the policy is being decided and when diplomats are having discussions. But in between, the UN agencies and the member states sometimes are just hosting side events, dealing with specific topics that matter to their state or to the agency that the UN agency that we're dealing with. So every week, every other day, there's an event on post-2015 development processes, on the consultations that are happening. As you can see in the diagram Ashish has, if you can just click on that bottom green one, Ashish, or you just pointed out, UN Development Group, those consultations are happening and have been happening for over a year now. And so there's constantly events at the UN talking about these specific consultations. So we, as the New York-based people, or I and my team who are here, it's important that we show up at these events and show our faces and are constantly present. But in terms of policy, like I said before, most of the hard policy work happens during the meetings where the governments are present. And that's really the most important aspect of the work, is making sure that all of our voices and all of our contributions to the policy of the major group gets pushed during the open working group meetings and the other meetings. Now, I know, Ashish, you wanted me to kind of give a little motivational
Chris,
statement.
I think, yeah, one thing. Sorry, Chris, you were going on. Sorry.
Yeah,
sorry.
sure. If you have any questions, just please.
Yeah, I
interrupt
think
me.
before the question and answer, in fact, it would be great if three of you also share a little bit about yourself. I know I gave a very short introduction, but we would be very curious about, what drives you to do this. What's your sense on how do we contribute, how do we increase the youth voice, and stuff around that, and a little bit about yourself. I think that would be interesting to hear from all three of you.
Saba, you want to start, I think?
Okay, so I got involved with the major group of children and youth by accident. I was actually in a meeting, and somebody came up to me and asked me if they could have a copy of my notes. And I said, sure. And then they asked me if I was going to the next UN meeting, and I said yes. And they said, can we have your notes? And I was like, what do you need my notes for? And they were like, oh, we're the major group of children and youth, and we're lobbying governments, and we don't have enough youth here, so we'd like some help. And I was like, oh, well, that's great, because I'm also young. So that's how I got involved 3 years ago. And now I'm organizing partner, and it's a huge learning curve. There was a lot of information that I didn't know about. My situation is kind of unique because I was interning for a NGO at the UN at the time, but other people have been involved in different ways. Some people through school or college, some people through capacity building workshops like this. What I've learned in my time is that it doesn't matter how much money you have or how much you don't need somebody to accredit you or get you a UN badge or to get funding. As long as you have a very big interest in sustainable development, as long as you're willing to be actively involved, there are ways to do everything else. You can find funding, you can find an organization to get you a pass so you can go into the meetings, you can get involved online, you can even actually run workshops online, you can do physical workshops in your community. That's not a barrier. The barrier has always been and will always continue to be myself. I always underestimated myself. I'm very shy in my nature, so for me to go and do something like go to the UN and say, well, actually this is something that was something that I would do. And local activity is very, very important because you can't change the world from the top down. You can only change the world by young people in their communities, working with their communities to make their communities better and sharing it with their friends and just spreading that. And that's how we're going to actually change the world. Yes, it's also important to talk to governments so that we can try and also make policies that make this easier. But the biggest change, and what I think I'm seeing the most, is that you actually have to take action, try and look at decisions, try and think of solutions, and then do them rather than just talk about it. It's very easy to talk, it's harder to do. And it's a big challenge for us. Every day you have to kind of struggle to do that. So that's how I got involved. I'm originally Irish. My mom's from Iran, so I'm a bit of a mix. And I love to travel. And last year I was actually based in the Philippines and India, but now I'm going to be based in South America because I work for different companies. So this is my hobby. This is my time. So Ashish or Chris?
Ashish, you want to go? Hello?
I think Ashish is muted again.
Oh, sorry, I had muted myself. Sorry, guys. Yeah. So I am from Delhi. I was born and brought up in Delhi. To study, I went to London. I did my undergrad in London, and I was actually studying banking and finance. Then I ended up coming to the US to study international peace, and I was working in an ecological economics think tank, which is like environmental economics, but they have a slightly different starting premise. But basically, I was always interested in the environment. I was part of the Indian Youth Climate Network in Delhi. It started in Delhi. I mean, it's nationwide now. And how I got involved with the major group was also kind of an accident. I didn't know about its existence even after participating in some of the meetings. I mean, I was at an economics conference, and some young people who were there were going to the UN, which was during the during the intersessionals for Rio. The intersessionals were the pre-Rio meetings. So like you had Rio plus 20, but a lot of work was done in New York when they had periodic meetings. So I ended up going for one of those meetings. I didn't know what the major group system was. I didn't know how civil society normally participates. Someone just accredited me and gave me a badge, like a temporary badge. So I was there, and then while I was there, I discovered this and got involved, and yeah, and I mean learned a lot, and it's been exciting. I highly recommend it. So I've been involved for slightly over a year. It doesn't seem like that, but yeah, it's great. And so yeah, again, I got involved on accident, and so it's great that we are reaching out to more people, and more people are reaching out. So you have this opportunity to be involved, and I would highly encourage you to stay in touch and be involved, because it's great. You get to learn a lot, get to meet a lot of people, and sometimes you get to travel, which is also always a plus.
Just to talk a little bit about myself, I'm a New Yorker, born and raised in New York. My family is Syrian, Lebanese Christians. My parents are immigrants. My entire family is immigrants who left the Middle East in the midst of the Arab-Israeli wars and the Lebanese Civil War and all the, conflict that takes place there. And the way I kind of fell into this was I've always been interested in international issues and kind of social justice work. And I've been active in Catholic youth groups throughout my life. And currently now, my main job is I'm the coordinator for the Pax Romana UN Advocacy Team, which is a Catholic youth-led organization that's a member of an international network of other youth organizations. And actually, we have a national movement in India and Pakistan and Bangladesh and Nepal. If anybody is from those 4 countries, I know most of you are. And right now, what can I say about my work besides that people think that it's very glamorous? People have this impression of UN advocacy that, we walk around in really fancy suits and we talk to fancy people and eat fancy foods and go to fancy events and parties, and that's not the case at all. And I said before in the chat that the more important work is the local work. Sometimes, again, and I think part of the reason why our work is considered glamorous is because we're among diplomats and people with power. But ultimately, a lot of the times, if I'm just talking at meetings and giving statements and interventions, it doesn't even come close to the importance of people on the ground in local communities at the grassroots doing the important hard work that gets done on the day-to-day basis. And I'm very blessed because I work for an organization that gives me the opportunity to do both. So I'm not just in the international capacity of my organization, I'm also very involved in my local movement here in the United States, which is actually made up of Middle Eastern Christians, Middle Eastern Catholics who work on social justice issues in urban areas in the United States. So next week I'll be going to one of our national retreats. We'll be working in communities in New Jersey, doing some social justice outreach, and it's great, and I'm very blessed to be able to do that. And I think one of our members from our Indian national movement just signed on. His name is Vivek. He's from Mumbai, and I'm very happy that he's here. And I would like to get him more involved in the major group, and hopefully he can use this little chat to get more involved. But I didn't mention how I got involved in the major group. I got involved in the major group from Lloyd, who's one of the deputy OPs, and our organizations are partnered at the international level. He represents the European Youth Forum, I represent Pax Romana, and we're both organizations are partner organizations, so he just kind of brought me in, and little did I know that it would become this crazy experience with all these new friends, and it's been great. So thank you very much, everyone.
Great. Thanks, Chris.
Thanks, Chris.
I must say one more thing here, particularly in terms of power and the fact that it's fairly decentralized at NGCY. We may imagine that people who are going to be reading statements on behalf of youth are able to just kind of shoot off the hip or give their own opinions, but typically people who are end up representing a collective view rather than their own sort of personal views, and they may at times be different from what. So if the youth constituency decides something, that's what you end up representing, and therefore to that extent you're more a spokesperson rather than somebody who's sort of talking and of their own opinions. I think that's important to note, that all of these people here act much more as dissemination points of information rather than your traditional power holders in the kind of democracies we're used to, where you vote them and they decide things for us. So they do not typically take decisions, particularly the ones which involve taking stands. Any position taken or stand taken is always a collective stand, and I mean, on behalf of all of us, we should definitely thank all of them for doing this quite selflessly, because this is all voluntary, and I'm sure it's extremely time intensive and energy intensive.
Yeah, so thanks, Abhishek, but I definitely agree. One of the most important things that you should realize is that we don't just go to the UN and give our opinion. We prepare in advance, and the reason we prepare is so that when we go to the UN and we say something, we know that other young people around the world agree with this point, that we've had all the consultation, all the contentious issues have been discussed, we've reached a compromise, this is what we've agreed upon, and it gives legitimacy to what we're saying. And we're saying, well, at the grassroots level, this is what they care about, this is what is important, this is what governments need to do. So yes, we act as a bridge between the opinions of young people around the world and the actual UN. And it's not just us, it's hundreds of young people representing thousands of organizations that represent millions of members, and you can all be part of it. You can all contribute your opinions and work in the process. It's very easy. It's very inclusive. I added a link for people who would like to have mentorship. And yes, we do occasionally get opportunities to sit at the UN, but those are the most important thing. The most important thing is going to governments, looking at them, and having meetings, discussing the issues, so that they can include it in their statements, so that they can include it in their points, so that it becomes part of policy, and it becomes the reality at the UN and the world. Then it becomes a norm. So, if Abhishek would like to take over?
Yeah, I think we can go into Q&A. Yeah, I think we can go to Q&A on this, but just before that, one last sort of thematic thing that I had for all three of you. And I mean, the context of this webinar is South Asian, and it's in the context of South Asian Youth Conference that we do, and there are a lot of opportunities that young people in South Asia have to now come together. But in terms of contributing and plugging into the larger system, are there 2 or 3 key points that we should sort of step into or get in loop with, or are there 2 or 3 things that we could do and feed back to you which may be very useful for the overall process? So are there a few of those sort of key things that you would sort of point out from a South Asian angle of our participation in stepping that up?
Yeah. Well, at the moment, there is a regional meeting happening in South Asia. I think that Abhishek may have sent the email around about that. I'm not sure if you did, but there's a link for you to sign up if you want to join. It's a meeting of all civil society that are interested in sustainable development. It's being held in Bangkok. There is some opportunity for funding. I think the deadline was yesterday, and be extending that depending on people who are coming. It's the Bangkok meeting. Then there's a lot of things that you can do in your region. You can run your own capacity building, like what the Blue Ribbon Movement are doing today. You can also do it at grassroots level, like what Rita is doing, and a few other people who are here in different organizations are actually running capacity building workshops. They're working with people who do not have internet access to get in, to work together. There's the South Asian Youth Conference. There's a lot of different events happening. It's not just going to conferences and sharing opinions. It's very important that you work with young people around you and work together to actually come up with things. We know in advance what topic is going to be discussed at the UN. So you should look at which ones are most interested in, what are the ones that are most important in your life, then you get your friends, your colleagues, leaders.
Okay, great. I think we can now open the floor for Q&A.
So,
I think Nehul wanted to directly ask his question. Yeah, sorry, Sabha.
Yeah, so just you asked, do we share reports or declarations? All our statements are put on the UN website. The United Nations add any children youth statements to the official UN documents from the link, and you can access them there. And then also childrenyouth.org is our website. It's not today, which we volunteers to help update that. They're having a conference call on Sunday. If you want to join, welcome. If you're into communications or social media. And there's also the mailing list. I just sent a link around the mailing list. If you join us, you'll get emails about the different things that are happening, how you can get involved.
Okay, that sounds great. I think we have questions, though it would be great if people could type, but I guess it's also perfectly fine if you ask. Please keep your questions focused and brief. We have about 10 minutes into the webinar, so if there are any questions, I guess guys can ask.
Like, if you're asking a question, just
Nehul, you had
unmute
a question?
yourself and ask the question. That's fine.
Yeah. Ashish, you will have to unmute Nehul.
Yeah, Ashish, that would be great.
Okay, while Ashish is unmuting Nehul,
Hello.
do we have Nehul unmuted? Yeah, I think we have.
Yep.
Hello.
So,
Yeah, Nehul, we can hear you.
I'm not sure how to pronounce
Yeah.
your name. I think Hi.
All right. Hi.
Sayukta,
I'm Mehul.
Sayukta.
Hello. Hello. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, Nehul, you are audible.
Okay. So
Hi,
I'm
how are you?
Mehul. I'm fine. I'm in class 11. So basically, I believe in youth leadership. So yeah. Because firstly, I think that really if the youth are involved in all these activities, then we can like set up a high standard for ourselves too, and we can work for the betterment. And basically, I would like to tell you that in our school we have a thing called MUN, that is Model United Nations. So there, it is basically UN. It's an enactment of the UN. We have different bodies, and we take part in all the bodies, and it's basically completely UN in our school. It's kind of a model. So I have a clear idea about the United Nations, like how it works, how it possesses. So participating in the MUN, without an institution, how it prospers, how it works. So it's looking at first, and I was very enlightened about the task that the UN is working on. So I just have a question that after basically like how does the meeting of the UN continue? Like how does it prosper?
Nehul, I think we've lost your.
Okay, that's a great question.
Hello.
So
Chris, can you also maybe turn off video?
unlike
Maybe
the
that
Model
might help
United
bandwidth.
Nations,
All right.
yeah. So the real UN and the UN are very different because
All
the
right.
Model UN is based on what the UN used to be like in the 90s, and it's very similar to the General Assembly, not the actual UN. So it's like the General Assembly would have resolution, but the UN doesn't do that. You spend two. You can actually. Sorry, I think the sound is really at the moment.
Yeah.
But anyway, you normally spend 2 years, like 1 or 2 years, drafting a document, and that document then gets agreed like the Rio Plus 20 conference, the Copenhagen meetups. But the GA itself is the one that actually that makes decisions, and it's not the way that we do it. But it's great to try and get it. We've actually done capacity building with young people involved with the Model UN, and we've had a lot of people who were involved with the Model UN get involved with the major group of children and youth. It is difficult at the beginning because they're very different, but you can pick it up.
All right.
So yeah, the reason they're not linked more is because of the differences between them. The UN has evolved since the 80s when the models were developed, and it's easy to keep that format, but the real UN has found that it's not actually possible to make decisions in a concrete way that way. However, it's a fantastic thing to be involved with. It teaches you a lot of skills like how to make statements, how to debate, how to reach consensus, how to research things. So I definitely think it's a valuable thing to do, but it's very different from the real. Are there any more questions?
Also, just to keep in mind that Model UN.
Yes, Abhishek?
I know, Saba, you mentioned this, but I just want to reiterate it. Model UN is not the real UN. The work that we do is the real UN. Just keep that in mind. So there is no actual connection between what happens in Model UN and in the real UN. It's just an opportunity for young people to learn how to get involved, or not even get involved, how to actually carry out these debating that happens at the UN.
Yeah, and also one addition thing about the model UN is I think in some ways it's not a great introduction to the UN because a lot of the modern UL is structured around competition and people have to win and they have to get this, have to get the best delegate award and all these things. And you actually need a lot of cooperation and consensus building and alliance formation at the real UN, and it's kind of different in that sense from the model UN. Like there's no award for best delegate, and you don't have to shut people off for the sake of shutting them off or prove that you're necessarily better. I mean, yes, people have their agendas which are given to them from the national governments, but the demeanor of people, how they interact with each other, how open they are to meetings, and is different in general from the model UN.
Yep.
Right. If we're trying to achieve some kind of paradigm shift in global cooperation, Model UN is not the way to do it. Sorry.
Okay, great. I think Kavita's question is also interesting around sort of people getting confused on what is going on. And what would be the most efficient or best way to get people up to speed with MGCY's work? I think that's one question. Do we have any guides, resources, or toolkits that we probably make? Sabha? Or maybe this webinar's
Okay.
I think there's a. I just want to.
Sorry, I think both me and Chris spoke at the same time. Chris, go first.
Okay, I think sometimes people are under the impression that there's something always happening, and I know sometimes even from my own organization, and like I said, there's a member of my organization here. I think we're not always good at communicating when things are happening, so it's kind of confusing. But there isn't always something happening, and people who want to get involved kind of have this drive and energy to like, I want to do something now. But there isn't always an event where we can actually make inputs on policy. So I just want to frame this next statement by Saba or Ashish based on that in mind. So if you guys have your energy and passion, don't just concentrate it in one time or one moment in time, because you need it throughout the year when things are actually happening that have policy inputs available. Sorry.
Sabha, you were also adding to what Chris was saying. And also, if you can take Sayukta's question.
Okay. So I was actually going to answer Kavita's question, which was in the chat, which was that her organization have joined the mailing list, but they're very confused by the process and they're not sure what to do. What we did earlier this year was we actually have created a mentorship program, and I'll send the link to you in a minute in the chat. And what the mentorship does is it matches somebody who has experience of the process with somebody who doesn't. So if you're new and you've never been involved with this before and it's scary and confusing, that's understandable. When I first got involved, I wasn't doing either, and I wasn't. I'm not going to lie, I was very confused most of the time. But we have a mentorship program which allows young people to actually get matched with somebody who has experience, who's been involved for a while, and I've just sent the link, and and it actually just matches you with somebody who can help you to get involved, can answer your questions, can work with you. But of course, they don't do this full time, so it's going to be somewhere that you fill in the thing, we'll match you with somebody, and you'll see how you work. You can agree together how many times you meet or how the process will work for you. It's just to allow people to feel more support. With Chris, I'm not sure what question you were answering just prior to that, so I'm not sure if I'll be able to answer it.
So, Sabha, the quick question also was, are there any tools
I think I was answering
right now where they can be heard?
Right. Yeah, it was dealing mostly with what's going on right now that they can get involved in.
Okay. All right. So right now at the UN, there's nothing happening. They're having their summer vacation. The next time you can actually, but you can get prepared. What the major group is doing is we're getting all our teams and task forces ready. We're doing training with them so that when September happens, when the UN starts working again, we're ready for the UN. We've prepared our lobby points, which are basically the key points that young people are interested in. We have our new team who are doing media and publicity. We have a new team that are going to be speaking at the UN or have applied for funding. So now is the time to be involved, because we are doing the recruiting, we're training people, we're building their capacity, we're getting young people and new people involved, and we're actually working with them to try and make sure that they feel that they know what they're doing when September happens. Because when September happens, it will be great. They will actually involved will have time to explain things, because they will be very, very busy with the actual UN. So if you want to get involved and you think that you are somebody who needs a lot of support, you're involved, then questions, or to will be receiving 200, 300, sometimes 2,500 emails a day. So we will not be answering your emails. So this is the patient and I can more questions, so I'll wait for this. Is there anyone else with more questions? Oh, I think that
guys,
there's a question for Chris.
Guys, sorry, 1 second. Guys, just one request. If you can type your questions, that will let us take common themes out of the question. So, Nehul, you need to type your questions, because that will let us draw common themes and let all of them answer. So, Ayushi, if you can type your question, Sayukta, you can repeat your question. And I think there was one more. So, and Habib, I think, had a question. So, Habib, if you guys can type it, it'll be better. These guys can keep answering them. That'll work much better in my.
I think Habib and Sanyukta, I'm sorry if I'm not saying your name properly, had a question to me. I don't know. I didn't see it though. So just both of you can.
Yeah, I think Habib had a question which Ashish was just going to unmute Habib. But for others, because we're just running short of time and we just sort of have about 5, 7, 10 minutes that we should take this on. So if you can just type it, we'll try and also draw themes. So I think just to summarize, I think Habib, you had a question about the organization Chris was running in his operations in Pakistan. Nehul has a question on how can he actually participate.
Hello, am I?
Yeah, sorry. I'll make answer.
Hi. So,
Hello.
Habib, is that you?
Yeah. I'm here.
Okay, so your question is particular about the my organization in Pakistan.
Yeah. I want to get involved. How I can work with you?
Okay, so the organization I represent is called the International Movement of Catholic Students. If Habib, you can just mute yourself because I'm getting the echo back from me. So my organization in Pakistan is based in Lahore, but because of religious issues, we're a very small organization in Pakistan. So I wouldn't know how you would be involved in the organization. The name of my organization is called the International Movement of Catholic Students, Pax Romana, and you can go, if you Google IMCS NIET, you can find our website. But if you're talking about getting involved, I can connect you to our president in Pakistan, the guy based in Lahore. I can connect you in that way. So if you want, Habib, find me on Facebook. Just search my name on Facebook, and then I can connect you with the Pakistan people.
Okay, so Sanyukta, I hope I'm pronouncing your name correctly. Apologies if I'm not. So the exact process of voicing your opinion in the UN is actually through the major group of children and youth if you're under 30. You can't do it as an individual. You can join the major group and discuss with them and try and get your issues to be agreed upon with the rest of the group. And when the group agrees on the topics, then the major group of children and youth have an opportunity to share that with the UN. The UN doesn't really have a process for every single individual to give their opinions. They prefer if civil society talk to each other, self-organize, discuss things, reach agreement, and then present it to the UN. Does that help?
Yep. I guess, yeah, I think joining the mailing list, I think, is the first obvious step for each of us, including Mehul for you, because the mailing list has a lot of information that's happening, and Sabah had posted the link. Maybe Sabah, you can paste it once more. And I think that's a great first step. Also, for people in South Asia, we are going to be doing the South Asian Youth Conference later in the year, and that will be and applications will be open soon. The event is in December, somewhere in mid-December. So you'll hear about it very soon on the Blue Ribbon Movement page. And I guess all these guys are also available for conversation and all these. I mean, I'd love to answer your question, Habib, but I guess we are sort of out on time. So I would suggest that we kind of exchange contacts for people who would like to stay in touch. Everybody is available on Facebook. NGCY is on Facebook, and so is the Blue Ribbon Movement and the South Asian Youth Conference. So please connect to all of these, and also please apply for the South Asian Youth Conference. We'll also have a report being launched very soon on youth participation, which again will be open for everybody's comments and consultations. So I guess I'd like to sort of wrap this up and thanks Sabah, Chris, and Ashish. If you guys have any last comments or anything that you'd like to share right at the end of all of these and questions, so any final comments or thoughts, Ashish, Sabah, and Chris?
So just to get involved, take action, do things in your local community. If you don't want to get involved online, if you want to get involved online, we have lots of opportunities. We have mentors that can support you and help you develop and ask your questions. There's Facebook that will answer most questions. There's the mailing list that will give you information and you'll be able to be up to date with what's happening. And then there's other conferences like the South Asian Youth Conference where you can meet other young people and share knowledge and work together and build collaboration.
Excuse me.
But it's definitely important. And thank you all for expressing an interest and for giving us this opportunity. And we look forward to working with you in the future.
Thanks, Sabah. Ashish, Chris?
Yeah, I would just encourage everyone to join the mailing lists, stay in touch, sign up for a mentorship program. Yes, it seems intimidating at first, it seems confusing, but once you start, as Abhishek said, the learning curve is very steep. You get to speed on things very quickly. And more importantly, what's more important than doing this is local action. You have to be doing both. If you're interested in creating sustainable change in the world, I mean, it's not one or the other. We have to engage at all levels, and we should engage wherever it is most easy for us to engage. That doesn't mean that you don't engage in places that are harder, but if you are a local person and there are issues in your surroundings and your locality that you can work around, you should definitely do that. And in addition to that, be involved with the NGCY.
Yeah, I mean,
Ashish, Chris, yeah.
involvement is super important. I know, I mean, the fact that all of you are on this call means that you have an interest in this. But, you know, it's super important that people from South Asia, from Africa, from all around the world take part in as many of these groups as possible, because sometimes the voice of the Global South gets lost in these things because of the ability of Global North organizations to be more involved than Global South organizations. And I can say this, I live in the Global North, but my organization is predominantly Global South. And it's good for my organization that I'm a permanent representative in New York. But a lot of organizations do not have that. And the major group provides all of you and all of us with the ability to have Global South representation at the UN. So it's super critical that all of you get involved in some way, whether through contributing policy or maybe hosting events in your locality that educates people about the ability to get involved in these different processes. So please do everything you can to kind of stay active.
Great, thanks a lot, Chris. I think the ball is pretty much in our court. I think we have this webinar which will be available, plus highly responsive partners, organizing partners. And I must really thank all of you for such a lovely webinar and taking out time. And thanks, Ashna, for organizing and running around for this as well. And thanks everybody else, I mean, all of us for being here. I think this is the start, or rather a stepping up of South Asian involvement in MGCY, and we only hope that each of us hijacks it fully and goes up there. We're all one big party, and let's make the most of it. Thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys.
Thank you, everybody.
Yeah.
Thank you, everybody. And I second Ashi. I have a second applause. Bye, everyone. I second Ashi. I have a second applause.